So picture this. It's late February 2026. A regional conflict suddenly explodes, and it threatens to cut off one of the most critical arteries of the entire global economy. We're talking about the crisis in the Straits of Hormuz. This was an event that sent absolute shockwaves through every single market on the planet. So how did one tiny, narrow strip of water manage to bring the world to the brink? To really get your head around the scale of this, just ask yourself this one question. Seriously, what would happen to your life, to your country, if 20% of the entire world's daily oil supply just vanished? Poof, gone from the market overnight. That's not some far-fetched hypothetical. It is exactly what the world was staring down the barrel of. And there's the number that really matters, 20%. Every single day, something like 20 million barrels of oil, that's a fifth of what the entire planet uses, has to navigate through this one single narrow channel. So when it slammed shut, you better believe it triggered a level of panic on the global markets we hadn't seen in decades. And this brings us to a really key term you gotta know, a maritime choke point. The Strait of Hormuz is the absolute textbook definition. It's a natural bottleneck, only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. This creates this immense built-in vulnerability. And in 2026, well, that vulnerability was brutally exposed for all to see. Okay, so how did this absolutely vital passage just slam shut so quickly? Well, the answer lies in a super rapid and pretty violent escalation of tensions that basically unfolded in a matter of days. I mean, look how fast this happened. We're talking less than a week. On February 28th, you have joint U.S.-Israeli strikes that hit Iran. And, this is the crucial part, they kill the supreme leader Ali Khamenei. Iran's response, it was immediate. Within hours, its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is warning all ships to stay away. By March 1st, they weren't just talking anymore. They started attacking ships. And by March 2nd, it was official. The IRGC confirmed it. The strait was closed. Done. And, the human cost was felt right away. These weren't just abstract threats being reported on the news. The oil tanker Skylight was attacked, and 2 crew members were killed. A U.S.-flagged tanker was damaged. A tugboat, the Musafa II, was actually sunk, and 4 of its crew died. The violence was real, it was deadly, and it sent a crystal-clear message to every shipping company on Earth. Stay out. Now, what's really important to understand here is that Iran didn't need some massive naval fleet to enforce this blockade. No, they used this multi-layered asymmetric strategy. Sure, you had the direct attacks from drones and missiles, but they also used hidden threats, like laying naval mines. They were messing with navigation by jamming GPS signals. And maybe the most effective tool of all, they drove the insurance risk for any ship so sky-high that it became economically impossible for most companies to even think about trying to make the trip. The global impact was just immense. But to really truly understand it, let's zoom in on one country that found itself particularly exposed, South Korea. We're talking a manufacturing powerhouse that is almost totally dependent on imported energy. And look, this isn't media hype. This is a direct statement from the South Korean government itself about a month into the crisis. The disruptions weren't some future problem to worry about. No, they were happening right then, right there. The crisis had officially landed on their doorstep. And here's why they were so vulnerable. Just look at this. A massive 70% of South Korea's crude oil imports came from the Middle East, and almost all of that had to flow through the Strait of Hormuz. So when that choke point was sealed, South Korea's main energy source was, for all intents and purposes, cut off. So the government's reaction was, as you can imagine, swift and desperate. They immediately jacked up the national energy alert level. They went into a full-on diplomatic scramble, basically pleading with the Gulf states for a stable supply. And yeah, they got a pledge to be a top priority, but the fundamental problem was still there. Even with a promise, how on earth was anyone going to get that oil out of the Gulf? South Korea's story was really just a microcosm of a much, much larger global scramble. With 20 million barrels of oil per day suddenly at risk, the entire world was forced to react to these huge economic and political shockwaves. The most immediate thing everyone felt? The price. Before this all kicked off, Brent crude was trading around a stable $85 a barrel. Almost overnight, it shot past $100 and then eventually peaked at an eye-watering $126. This was one of the fastest price shocks in modern history, and it sent this horrible wave of inflation across the entire globe. So you might be asking, why couldn't they just reroute the oil? Well, it all came down to simple math. The sheer volume flowing through the strait was over 20 million barrels a day. The combined capacity of all the regional pipelines that bypassed the strait, only 9 million. There was just no way for the existing infrastructure to absorb that much displaced oil. It's like trying to divert a whole superhighway's worth of traffic onto a single country lane. It just doesn't work. And the damage went way beyond oil. Suddenly, up to a third of the world's fertilizer trade was at risk, which threatened global food supplies. Qatar, a huge supplier of natural gas, declared force majeure, which is basically an act of God clause, on some of their contracts because they just couldn't deliver. In response, the International Energy Agency coordinated this massive, historic release of strategic oil reserves, while countries like India started deploying their own navies to protect what little traffic dared to sail. So the crisis did eventually de-escalate, but the economic damage, and maybe more importantly, the geopolitical lessons, they lingered, leaving the whole world with a really pressing question. At the end of the day, the 2026 crisis proved one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. For all our amazing technology and our interconnected markets, the entire global economy could still be held hostage by a 21-mile wide stretch of water. It was just a brutal, brutal reminder of how fragile our supply chains really are. And that leaves us with this final thought to chew on. The Strait of Hormuz was just one choke point. There are others all over the world. This crisis, it forced nations to completely reevaluate their energy dependencies. But the big, fundamental question is still out there. Are we actually building a more resilient system, or are we just sitting around waiting for the next crisis to hit?